Welcome back to GH Updates, your go-to spot for all the drama, revelations, and explosive secrets from General Hospital. Buckle up, because the episode airing on Monday, June 2nd, 2025, is nothing short of a seismic shakeup in Port Charles. Let's break it all down. General Hospital will reveal after undergoing an experimental neurological surgery with the fervent hope of regaining mobility and resurrecting his since promising football career. Kyphone himself confronted with a reality far more brutal than any prognosis. Cold-heavy anticipated, his body not only failed to recover as expected, but also began to exhibit a cascade of debilitating complications. Chronic pain took root in his muscle sand, joints like fire under the skin, while uncontrollable tremors and prolonged spells of imbalance became his new normal. These weren't just medical side effects, they were the dismantling his identity. Once celebrated as a rising goth elite with a future paved in glory, Kai could barely stand without assistance. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw less of the vibrant competitor he once was and more of a man confined by very surgery meant to liberate him. Yet, wasn't the physical agony that ultimately ignited the deepest sense of betrayal in Kai. It was the growing realization that he had been deceived. That betrayal festered every time he remembered the polished, almost mechanic promises Drew had made. Drew hadn't merely offered support for the surgery. He had branded it as a gift, a golden ticket to redemption. He sold Kai a dream cloaked in benevolence, all while positioning himself to reap their rewards. Drew had insisted the surgery would not only restore Kai's career, but would also serve as the centerpiece of a documentary that would highlight Kai's inspirational comeback. A campaign perfectly timed to boost Drew's burgeoning political aspirations. Initially, Kai remained silent. He didn't want to be perceived as Simeon who blamed others for his misfortune. Nor did he want to publicly admit that the gamble he took had failed catastrophically. He still carried the pride of a competitor, even if that pride was now crippled alongside his booty. But silence became impossible to maintain as he watched himself being parried across television screens and social media feeds. His image manipulated and sanitized to fit a narrative that elevated Drew as a compassionate visionary, a cuminary. Drew commissioned Kai appeared, smiling in hospital bees, making hopeful remarks, careful accurate pic from hours of footage. But Ho's smiles, those words had been stripped off context. They no longer reflected truth. They were tools, instruments in Drew's self-aggrandizing machine. With each passing week, the documentary aired in more markets. Drew's name appeared in more headlines, and Kai's inbox flooded with messages from fans who believed he had made a miraculous recovery. The disparity between the lie presented to the public and the private agony he endured was maddening. Kai wasn't just forgotten, he was actively being used. His suffering had become someone else's stepping stone. The betrayal grew unbearable. The decision to sue Drew wasn't made in a single emotional outburst. It was forged in weeks of turmoil, consultation with medical and legal experts, and sleepless nights reliving the chain of events that led him to this point. What began as regret slowly crystallized into resolve. Kai ultimately filed a lawsuit in Port Charles, listing multiple allegations: some danger personal health, medical coercion, exploitation of vulnerable patients, manipulation of public image, and severe breaches of professional ethics. The filing sent shockwaves through the city. Media outlets that hadn't heralded Drew as a beacon of modern philanthropy now began running posts questioning his motivations, his methods, and the political machine behind him. The lawsuit broke through surface like an earthquake, cracking pristine image Drew had so careful a construct. No longer in control of the narrative, Drew was forced into a reactive position, scrambling to defend himself as long-buried secrets began to claw their way into public view. Whispers of prior unethical partnerships, conflicts of interest, and the quiet silencing of dissenting doctors began to emerge. Former collaborators distanced the Memsvis. Financial backers discreetly pilled out. Political allies fell salant. The empire Drew had constructed in charisma and calculated optics began to collapse, and he was powerless to stop it. Even more damaging was theming. Kai's lawsuit coincided with Drew's custody battle against Willow, a case that had already divided public opinion and strained Drew's public persona. Willow, who had once stood beside Drew as a partner and co-parent, watched in stunned horror as the allegations mounted. She had believed in him, defended him, and considered him a stabilizing presence for their children. But now faced with evidence that Drew had manipulated a vulnerable young gothalate for personal gain, her trust evaporated. Every affectionate promise, every speech about family and protection. Now they felt hollow, like lines in a script Drew had written for his own benefit. The fallout extended to Willow's decision-making, realizing that Drew's legal battles were ironly just beginning and his character reprobably damaged, she withdrew from their custody, choosing instead to prioritize the emotional and psychological safety of her children. She relocated Way and Amelia to live with Carly, where they could grow up free from the looming shadow of a scandal that threatened to consume their father's life. Willow didn't leave with bitterness. She left with sorrow, acquiesced ache that the man she had once trusted had in the end chosen ambition over integrity. As for Kai, he refused to fade into obscurity. Though still confined to a wheelchair and undergoing intensive physical therapy, he became a powerful symbol of resistance against exploitation in the medical and political systems. Advocacy groups rallied behind him and used his platform to speak out about dangers of for-profit experimentation and the need for transparency in patient care. But hadn't been a football career became a something larger, an unexpected mission driven by justice, not victory. He found strength not in touchdowns or trophies, but in truth. Meanwhile, Drew's world narrowed. He was no longer greeted with applause, but twisted Venus. The smile that once charmed rooms now faltered under courtroom lights. Public opinion turned against him with commentators and former supporters, questioning how long he had been willing to use others as means to an end. His documentary was pulled from major platforms. His campaign was suspended indefinitely, and legal experts speculated that criminal charges could follow. In the end, Kai's lawsuit did more than seek restitution. It unveiled a truth long buried beneath Drew's charm. It dismantled the illusion of altruism and exposed the dangerous intersection of ego, ambition, and manipulation. Drew may have once believed he could shape public perception to serve his agenda, but in the face of one man's unwavering pursuit of accountability, even the most careful folliculated empire can come crashing down. Kai, broken in body but whole in purpose, had reclaimed his narrative, and Drew, once the architect of reputations, was left to confront the ruins of his own. Worse still, the timing of Kai's lawsuit couldn't have been more catastrophic for Drew. The legal action struck with brutal precision in the middle of his contentious custody battle against Willow, his ex-wife, a woman who hadn't stood beside him in courtrooms and public life, defending his character which critique. For months, Willow had fought to preserve a sense of unity for the sake of their children, Way and Amelia. She had believed in Drew's transformation, believed that despite his ambition and occasional moral lapses, he still harbored a genuine love for his children. She had stood firm in her support, trusting in the man she thought she knew, choosing to see his missteps as misguided attempts to protect their future rather than acts of manipulation. But everything changed the moment the lawsuit from Kai became public knowledge. The allegations painted a disturbing portrait. A powerful man who had used his influence and charm to pressure a vulnerable young athlete into a dangerous experiment, also one not properly vetted, one that had clearly gone awry. The accusation that Drew had not fully disclosed the medical risks, combined with his push for a documentary, meant to light his philanthropy, struck Willow like a bolt of betrayal. It was no longer just about Kai's physicalcifering. It was about the ethics Drew had ignored, the humanity he had discarded for the sake of optics. Willow was shaken to her core. The Drews she had defended, now Apparetto, be the architect of another man's tragedy. And that realization fractured simming deep within. Her trust, once unyielding, began to unravel. She could no longer view Drew's ambitions as harmless or his misjudgments as forgivable. What if that same disregard for consequences extended into his parenting? What if the man fighting for custody of Wei and Amelia was incapable of recognizing when he was endangering others? Not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. The courtroom, already tense, became a pressure cooker as the scandal unfolded in real time. Reporters camped outside his courthouse, desperate for a glimpse of Kai or a statement from Drew's legal team. Inside, the tone shifted. Judges and lawyers spoke in more measured tones, aware that the man on trial for custody was now also being investigated for medical coercion and public fraud. Willow felt the stares, the speculation, the creeping sense that she was complicit if she continued to stand by Drew. It was no longer about the children's best interest being debated in abstract legal terms. It was about their father potentially becoming a symbol of exploitation and moral failure. Willow didn't make her decision lightly. She agonized over it for days, torn between the desire to preserve the family she had once envisioned and the need to protect her children from a father whose judgment was now fundamentally in question. Everything changed when she saw Kai, once strong, agile, full of promise, roll onto a public stage in a wheelchair. His voice trembled, barely rising above a whisper as he described his journey from hope to despair. And yet, beneath the weakness was undeniable strength. Kai wasn't seeking pity. That moment crystallized a guarantee for Willow. There was no longer room for denial or rationalization. She couldn't let her children grow up idolizing a man who had contributed to someone else's devastation and then tried to bury the evidence beneath smiles and camera crews. Her love for Wei and Amelia meant giving them more than safety. It meant raising them with integrity, with values rooted in compassion and truth. And so, without fanfare or spectacle, Willow withdrew from the custody battle. She didn't frame it as surrender. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about choosing clarity over chaos. She packed up the children's belongings and quietly moved them to Carly's home, a place that, while imperfect, offered stability and warmth far removed from turmoil Drew had created. Carly, though once a point of tension between her and Drew, opened her doors without question, sensing the weight behind Willow's silence. For Willow, it wasn't just a physical rocation. It was an emotional severance. She had loved Drew once deeply and earnestly, but the man he had become, or perhaps always was, no longer had a place in the lives of her children. Word of Willow's decision spread quickly through Port Charles. The courtroom fell silent when our legal team submitted the formal withdrawal. Drew sat frozen, stunned by the realization that the very person he had counted on to validate his role as a father had walked away, not out of spite, but out of heartbreak. The judge, noting the development, paused proceedings in defense, citing the need to evaluate Drew's standing in light of ongoing criminal investigation and the profound personal consequences now unfolding. The fallout was immediate and staggering. Drew's political advisors vanished. Don Norsky sappered. His media team relayed statements in damage control mode. But public had already drawn their own conclusions. Willow's exit spoke volumes. Her departure wasn't a statement. It was a verdict. In the days that followed, Willow kept a low profile. She focused on re-establishing routines for Wei and Amelia, enrolling them in school activities, building new bedtime rituals, and creating a home not defined by conflict or scandal. She didn't speak ill of Drew, not to the children, no Tevin in private. She simply chose not to include him in the future she was building. And in that quiet, firm decision, she found some next. Peace. For Drew, the silence was deafening. The absence of his children, the emptiness of the campaign trail, the coldness of public opinion. These were the consequences, not of one mistake, but of a pattern. And as he sat alone, watching reruns of the documentary, it once filled him with pride. He began to see what everyone else now saw. A man so obsessed with controlling the narrative that he lost sight of the truth. And the people who mattered most, Willow's choice had not only ended the custody fight, but marked the collapse of Drew's carefully constructed empire. What remained was a cautionary tale told not in headlines, but in the soft, steady resilience of a mother who chose love over loyalty and truth. Over illusion? Meanwhile, Drew descended into a maelstrom of legal battles and relentless media scrutiny. The once confident, charismatic figure who had commanded stages and courtrooms, Alikino found himself shrinking under the weight of scandal. His careful cultivazel, which had once bolstered his image as a political visionary and philanthropic leader, began to disintegrate with shocking speed. Won by own political allies, to stance the Memphis, offering no comment when questioned by reporters, campaign donors wary of association with controversy withdrew their support. Sponsorships vanished shed over net. Every financial pillar Drew had depended on to fuel his rise crumbled beneath him as swiftly as public confidence in his character. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the revelations became. What had initially appeared as a tragic medical mishap was now taking shape as a deliberate orchestration. Evidence emerged that Drew had coerced Kai into undergoing the surgery by presenting it not as a gamble, but as a golden opportunity, cloaked in reassurance. Internal communication sects that Drew had knowingly withheld critical medical evaluations detailing the actual risks of the procedure, particularly the very complications Kai ultimately endured. Rather than present those facts too transparently, Drew had minimized the danger, dismissing caution in favor of optics. He had used selective information to maintain a spotless public image and push forward a personnel brand centered on redemption and innovation. And so the legacy Drew had meticulously built, brick by brick, speech by speech, favor by favor, began to erode. Under the weight of moral compromise, his political career, once poised for national prominence, teetered on the edge of ruin. Within days, campaign off-shuttered, endorsements vanished. Onda's name, once synonymous with hope and inspiration, became shorthand for deception and betrayal. Port Charles, a town that had not embraced Drew as a forward-thinking role model for the next generation, now watched his fall with a mixture of horror and disgust. Where there had once been cheering crowds and flashing cameras, there was only the cold, cavernous silence of the courtroom. Gone were the media entourages that once followed his every move. In their place stood courtrooms cardists, and legal correspondents ran on each detail of his public unraveling. The people of Port Charles had just feel disappointed. They felt betrayed. Drew hadn't simply failed in judgment. He had violated a sacred trust by exploiting the hopes of another human being for personal gain. Kai, the one secret figure in Drew's narrative, emerged not just as a survivor, but as a beacon of truth. Though his body bore the consequences of betrayal, his voice now resonated louder than ever. In public forums, until visa denters, Kai became the symbol of resistance against the commodification human vulnerability. He spoke with courage about the dangerous medical coercion and the ethics of using real suffering to manufacture politic. Medical symposiums and legal rounds began to cite his story as a cautionary tale urging reform and oversight in both the political and healthcare sectors. His name no longer appeared beside the word victim, but bezed advocate, truthler, and catalyst. The transformation was profound. Kai had lost his physical strength, but found in its place something far more enduring: integrity, clarity, and a purpose that reached beyond stadiums and trophies. He now championed the rights of others who had been silenced by systems too powerful to challenge, systems that Drew had once operated with impunity. His journey from a hospital bell to a podium wasn't just about feeling. It was about redefining strength. In a world that so often confuses confidence with character. And while Drew faced mounting legal consequences, including the very real prospect of prison time, Willow quietly began rebuilding a new life alongside Carly and Jason, with her children safely. Away from the media circus, she reestablished a home defined not by conflict or court orders, but by trust and peace. Carly provided stability, and Jason, known for his unshakable sense of duty, stepped into for the protection and presence Drew had failed to maintain. Willow no longer needed validation from a man whose love-huddle ways been entangled with ambition. She had made her choice not out of vengeance, but out of love for her children and a desire to shield them from the ripple effects of deceit. The courtroom, once filled with Drew's booming voice and rhetoric alpharus, now echoed with the quiet gravity of accountability. There were no more lofty speeches, no grand declarations of repose. There was only Drew, stripped off title and triumph, left to recon with the reality he had created. And in that reckoning, he found no one to blame but himself. His fall was not the result of a single catastrophic mistake, but of a series of decisions, each seeming listenable but collective electiston. Each time he chose appearance over honesty, ambition over ethics, and power over people, he inched closer to this inevitable collapse. He wasn't removed from Willow's life in a single dramatic moment. He was undone by a long sequence of calculated missteps, each one Anathor stepped down the path 12 ends. In the end, it wasn't a court ruling that removed Drew from Willow's world. It was consequence, slow, cumulative, and unrelenting. His name became a shadow in the lives of those he once claimed Tokari. For his presence, once commanding, was now unwelcome. And his absence, though once unthinkable, became a quiet relief. Kai, in contrast, stepped into his future not as the athlete he once dreamed of being, but as a man, forged in adversity and reborn through truth. His courage reshaped the conversation, and his testimony echoed for beyond the courtroom walls. He reminded the world that dignity is not found in triumph alone, but in their refusal to be silenced when wronged. Drew had tried to shape the world to reflect his version of truth. What a whirlwind of emotion, betrayal, and bombshell revelations. Monday's episode promises to change the lives of Port Charles residents forever. Will Michael recover from Sasha's revelation? Will Nina's secrets destroy her credibility? And is this really the end for Curtis and Portia? One thing's for sure, General Hospital is just getting started. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to GH Updates for your daily dose of drama. We'll be right here, bringing you every twist, every turn, and every unforgettable moment. Until next time, stay tuned, Port Charles fans.